The chip sector is absolutely in focus right now. Just respond to what you heard from Kunjan there on their thesis on geopolitics and who may or may not benefit in a Trump presidency.
Well, I think it is really early to say, and I think that's why we're seeing so much volatility, because while we have a sense from Trump himself, from his vice president, from his top advisors, how he looks at competition with China, the prescriptions that he will use really are unclear to date. Based on what the Biden administration is doing, we are seeing the potential for more curbs on American and non-American semiconductor products, particularly hardware, going to support China in increasing its focus on technology self-reliance, a key theme coming out of the third plenum. That is what we're hearing, that Xi Jinping is saying we need more indigenous innovation, we need technology to help us build our own semiconductor industry, because we cannot rely on an uncertain geopolitical landscape, given uncertainty in the United States and in Europe, two key suppliers, and of course Japan, of this technology hardware to China. As a result of that, of course, American, European, Japanese hardware providers of China's global semiconductor manufacturing are being pressured to restrict what they are going to continue to sell and service in China. That's where so much of this uncertainty is, because the question of how, what are the restrictions? Will the United States be successful in negotiating with the Dutch, with the Japanese governments, to really expand restrictions on what can be provided to China is
Amy,
the key.
How much do you believe that the threats will become reality? How much do you think that the Dutch and the Japanese will curtail servicing technology that already exists in China?
Well, I think there's going to continue, of course, to be American industry pressure that not they alone face those restrictions, Caroline. And so while, of course, U.S. industry doesn't want to see more restrictions on what they can sell to China if there is not a direct national security concern, they right now are unfairly competing against Japanese and Dutch companies that are continuing to sell to China. And so, yes, I do think that there's going to be more pressure to expand those restrictions. I do not think what we were rumored to be hearing about, that there was going to be a massive expansion, is going to come into play. Certainly not in the Biden administration. I think there will be incremental steps to restrict certain companies in China from receiving more semiconductor hardware products in the near term. The Trump administration, which is what we are talking about here, is the big unknown.
Amy, it takes two to tango, right? And you don't have a crystal ball. But if you take the EV industry as a parallel example, what China did was give large volume subsidy, but it had a limited shelf life. Do you recognize a sort of willingness from the Chinese government to sort of fund their response to any sort of political or geopolitical policy that either administration comes with in November?
Yeah, I think that's the key point. I think the Dutch and the Japanese are very concerned, not just for their companies that are providing that technology hardware to China, were they to be restricted. It's not just their profits, it's China's retaliation. I think Xi Jinping has been extremely clear that if a stranglehold on certain high-tech products and services continues, vis-a-vis the China market, he is going to respond. He is not, as he has said, going to sit idly by and watch those restrictions continue to expand. And so the Dutch, the Japanese, and the U.S. government have to think long and hard on the kinds of retaliatory tools China has available right now. For example, export restrictions on graphite, Caroline, to Japan, something Japanese industry desperately needs. My final point, though, would be China has to weigh its retaliation to make sure the retaliatory moves don't harm further an already very, very shaky economy in China.
Well said, Amy.
It doesn't have the leverage it had a few years ago.
You advise corporates, you advise non-profit clients at the moment, ultimately about business and policy interests. Can you advise us and our audience about Taiwan, about some of the sentiment that seemed to be displayed by an interview of Bloomberg Business Week with former President Trump that maybe they wouldn't come to Taiwan's aid. What does that mean for TSMC and for Taiwan?
Well, obviously, the silence coming from Taiwan is deafening here. They are not responding to former President Trump's Bloomberg interview there. Instead, they are choosing to stand by what the platform of the Republican Party traditionally has been, which is to include Taiwan in it, and to say that, of course, the United States and Taiwan have a legislatively mandated, very strong relationship that does include U.S. provisions to come to Taiwan's aid. Of course, it's up to the commander-in-chief, so Taiwan authorities must be worried. But I will say the worry is probably not severe right now because most of the advisors around President Trump, including his selection of vice presidential candidate with J.D. Vance, are very strong supporters of Taiwan. And so within a Trump 2 administration, were that to come to pass, there are going to be very significant conversations around how the United States continues to focus more on Asia than Europe, which is clearly a platform that we're starting to hear coming out of the Republican convention, and what that means for U.S. policy towards Taiwan. So I wouldn't be so quick to conclude that President Trump is going to abandon Taiwan in the event of some kind of conflict. That would really be going against traditional U.S. policy, particularly among the Republicans.
Amy, so important to have your expertise. We thank you. Amy Celico, Principal Analyst at Albright Stonebridge Group. We thank you. Ed, what's so interesting is we see this volatility in the individual stocks today as we question ultimately some of the valuations and where we've run to in the Nvidias and the like.
Yeah, I think what's so astonishing about the conversation we just had, detailed, but we didn't even discuss about another factor, which is the AI-driven boom, right? Growth driven by demand for AI accelerator manufacturing. TSMC has clients everywhere. And so I just wonder how, maybe we'll talk to Jensen about it in a few weeks' time, but it's like geopolitics takes away one market. There are plenty waiting in the wings to get some capacity. And I just thought it was weird that we didn't bring that up.
But then Goldman Sachs top research analyst today currently saying maybe you need to question the ultimate demand of AI in the longer term. Will it really drive this productivity growth? Great story on Jim Cavolo from some of our colleagues in Bloomberg News today. Meanwhile, coming up, Apple, we know, is in talks to license more films from major Hollywood studios. Look, it's an effort to bolster its Apple TV Plus streaming service. Being reported by Bloomberg. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg Technology.